Thank you very much, Fred, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everybody. And it is our pleasure to be here today in the PITA Business Forum. And today we will be focusing on policy and regulatory issues. Now, this forum has been really interesting. I've been observing since day one, as we've discussed a lot of issues which are so relevant now. And I think with the digital transformation now on the anvil in the Pacific, we've got here the regulator from Samoa with the Digital Transformation Authority. PNG passed a digital transformation policy last year, they adopted. So wherever we go, we see the onset of digital transformation. So this session is very apt because what COVID has done has just accelerated the process. And in the past, we had a lot of challenges, not only on the supply side, but also on the demand side. And we are today in a world where people are ready and people are eager to accept digital solutions. So this is a great moment for all of us from the ICT community who can make a change. In fact, other sectors are looking at us on how we can drive or accelerate the process. But before we begin this session, a big thank you to PITA for organizing such a wonderful event with all the key people and all the fellow panelists. Before we start, maybe we can have like a 30 seconds, a quick introduction. Is it okay? So let's start with Jongbong. So Jongbong, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ashish. This is Jongbong, working for APT as a Pacific Telecommunity, and then great to see you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Jongbong. And we'll go to Janet. She's in the UK now. So Janet, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeanette White. I'm the head of public policy in APAC for the GSMA. And for those of you who don't know the GSMA represents the interests of mobile operators worldwide. So we have more than 750 operators and nearly 400 companies that we represent in the industry. So looking forward to today's session. Thank you.
Great. So from terrestrial, let's go to the sky. And let me call Mohamed from Intelsat.
Greetings to everybody. My name is Mohamed Jawad. I'm the Senior Manager for Spectrum Strategy at Intelsat. Intelsat being the largest satellite operator. We look forward to giving you a presentation about C-band in this session. Thank you.
Thanks, Mohamed. And now we'll go to the regulator. We have Madam Regulator Nisa here and Teresa. So Nisa and Teresa, the floor is yours. Nisa, you're muted. Can you please unmute yourself?
Thank you very much, Ashish. It's great to see you again, and also some of our colleagues. I can see all of them on the board listening. It's a pleasure to be here, and I really, really miss the face-to-face PITA meeting. I've never missed one, and I was there right on the beginning. So it's great to be here online. Now, our presentation today depicts the policy and regulations that are implemented by my office for Samoa. It also gives an insight on ICT infrastructure, the challenges we are facing, and so forth. So I'm the regulator. And before that, I used to work alongside Ashish at the ITU. And then I went to the Commonwealth Telecommunication Organization as the Director of ICT and also the Acting Secretary General for 2 years. Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be back, and I have a great team.
Thank you very much, Nisa. I still remember when you sent me to Nepal when the earthquake happened, and that was quick response. And while we are there, I must also recognize that we've got the president of PITA, Mr. George Samisoni, who's there. And it was a pleasant surprise to see Mr. Ioane Koroyuki, my former boss at the ITU, should also to also join us, apart from a lot of other colleagues whom we know. Over to you, Teresa.
Pula Talofalawa, So I don't have a long intro because I'm new in this field, but my name is Teresa and I am one of the spectrum engineers from the Spectrum and Technical Services Division working here at the Office of the Regulator under the guidance of Madam Regulator Misa Fotai Prisau. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Teresa. So let's, I have one slide to share to set the session, and then we'll go on with the presentation. I'm just waiting for the slides to be there. Okay, so this was the final slide made during the keynote speech by our regional director during the opening session on what are the key things that we can do going forward to realize Digital Pacific. I mean, we all know that it's happening. We all know it's been going on. So from ITU's approach point of view, one of the suggestions that came up is first is the connectivity, and that reliable and affordable connectivity. And now we need to think beyond pure access and look at specific digital services to unconnected islands and communities. So when we think about it, we have to think a little broad, because connectivity to education is not the same as connectivity to emergency telecom, is not the same as connectivity for speech or text. For example, if you want to have a very e-education, then the duration of connectivity is going to be quite long. And of course, when we move to mobile broadband, it can turn out quite unaffordable. So we have to think in terms of services and how connectivity links to the two meaningful services. The second, which is becoming now almost a global trend, is whole of government approach. And siloed approach have always led us to a lot of unsustainable solutions. And how do we bring the scale at a national level, at an international level, to make it more sustainable? Now, what is driving now in the Pacific is very high quality connectivity, or broadband connectivity that's happened with fiber coming in, with the broadband satellites coming in, with 4G being deployed, and pre-5G trials, and so on. But let's look at an end-to-end experience. From when we look at the other sectors like health, like finance, like education, like e-commerce, they have all picked up a lot, not only earlier, but also during the pandemic. So what it has created for us is a great opportunity to synergize, because all sectors are deploying digital services. So if we can promote greater reuse of the ICT resources beyond just network, but also at service level, at data level, at platform level, then we definitely increase the sustainability of these services. But this should come with a lot of awareness, skills, and we have to be very mindful that we leave no one behind, as we say now. And it needs to be inclusive, because someone who does not have access to this meaningful connectivity gets sort of socially isolated. So digital inclusion is now paramount. And all of this comes with some risk. And of course, when we are in the Pacific, we have to talk of resilience. We have seen the kinds of challenges that are experienced during typhoons, during cyclones. And so we need to think about resilient structure, because now not only competing commercial services, but critical citizen services would also be flowing. And sometimes these services may not be offered from the same place, same country, or same island. So we need to think about data protection. We need to think about cybersecurity, data privacy. A number of countries where I have been working with, we have seen tremendous awareness from the ITU side on data protection, cybersecurity, and resilience in the Pacific. So in this background, I think I'll stop here, and it provides us with some thoughts on how to build on it. How do we realize Digital Pacific by cooperating, by synergizing, by collaborating in the interest of the community or the end user who needs an end-to-end digital experience. So with this, now let me invite our first speaker, who just introduced himself, Jongbong. So Jongbong, the floor is yours to present the APT perspective.
Thank you, Ashish. Okay, before I start, I wish to share my screen.
Yes, thank you, John.
Okay, thank you, Ashish. Thank you, PITA, and then for inviting APT and me to make a presentation. I think this PITA Business Forum and exhibition it was provide some good opportunity for PITA members and others to share their activities. I think it would be good for APT to make some contribution. The other day, PITA approached the APT to share some of the activities in terms of the global policy and regulation setting. So APT come up with some of the presentation about APT preparatory process for the ITU conferences and assembly. I will make a short presentation to give much time for Q&A. Those who are not familiar with APT, I will make a short presentation of who is APT. APT is a treaty-based intergovernmental organization which was established in 1979. And then we have 38 members and 4 associate members. And then we also have industry participation through the affiliate members, 136 affiliate members. Our constitution says that maximize the benefit of ICT for the welfare of people in the region is our main mission. And then foster the development of telecommunication and services in information infrastructure and the development of regional cooperation. And those are the 2 action items. So today's talk, I will focus on the development of regional cooperation in development of the policy and regulation. And in particular, I will focus on the facilitate the coordination in the region to set up the regional common view. We are now in the session of the policy and regulation. As I said earlier, ITU is the place to set up the global agenda for policy and regulation. But at the same time, APT provides our regional basis for our members to share the best practice and then some recommendation to other members through our platform. When you look at the first left-hand side column, there is a policy and regulation forum. And then APT has a specific program for the Pacific Island countries. For those purpose, we call the Policy Regulation Forum for the Pacific. And then we also address the development for issues and spectrum management issues. And then APT also provides some recommendation and technical reports through the AWG and ASTAP. And then we also cover some cybersecurity and disaster management issues, aside from other training and expert missions. Today, I will focus on the collaboration and partnership, especially the preparatory process for ITU conferences and assembly towards the Plenipotentiary Conference, World Radio Conference, WTSA, ITU-T Sectors Assembly, and WTDC, ITU-D Sector Conference. Here is the timeline for APT preparatory meetings. Let me start with the WTSA, which was supposed to be held last year in Hyderabad, India. So APT commenced our work back in 2019 to set up the structure and the work plan and working methods. But as you know, COVID-19 struck the world, and then this WTSA was the first victim. And then ITU and the host country, India, decided to shift the schedule to 2021 and then finally 2022. So APT tried to address the issue and then expanded the preparatory process to additionally 2 more years. And then when it comes to ITU Plenipotentiary Conference to be held in 2022, so starting from this year, this July, we will commence the work of Plenipotentiary Conference. And then we hope the schedule of PP will be the same as it is scheduled. And then when it comes to WRC, APT commenced our work back in 2020. And then there will be a number of APT preparatory process and meetings towards the WRC 23. And then when it comes to WTDC, last year we started the first meeting of WTDC. And then we observed the council document, the Ethiopia, which is the host country of WTDC 21, requested the postponement of the WTDC in 2022 in June timeline. So depending on the situation, APT will provide some additional opportunity for our members to coordinate the regional view. So I will briefly introduce the timeline, the structure, and the issues for the Pacific to set up the national policy and regulation through the global agenda. So when it comes to APT preparatory process, as you know, the APT proposals are the optimum outcome of the meeting. And then also the meeting can develop the APT position and APT view depending on the agreement of the plenary. I don't wish to go in detail with this slide. These two slides, slide 5 and 6, outline the condition for the preliminary APT common proposals and the condition for APT common proposal. I hope PITA can share this slide with members who are interested in. Okay, let's start with the PP, Plenipotentiary Conference preparatory process. The July 1st, in this year, we will have the first PP Prime meeting. Because of the COVID, we organized an event virtually to discuss the work plan and the nomination of the office bearers, and then working methods, and the structure as well. And then for the as of now, the PP will be held in Bucharest, Romania, in September and October. So toward the journey to the PP, APT provides a series of the preparatory meeting. Next year, we plan to have 3 times meeting, but depending on the progress of the meeting, APT is willing to provide additional extra meeting or additional interim meeting of the working groups. This is the tentative structure of the PP Prep meeting. The first one is policy and regulation, working group 1. Working group 2 is administration and management, which has more of budgetary issues and administration issues. And the working group 3 covers the public policy and other general matters. And then when it comes to office bearers, I think within this week or early next week, APT Secretariat will send the circular letters to our members for the nomination of the chairman and vice chairman and the working group chairman and vice chairman. So if you are interested, please let Secretariat know with the CV. And then it's a good news to be shared. We got the indication from one of the Pacific countries to nominate the chairman of the prep group from the Pacific. Regarding the topics of the interest, I provide some general description at this slide. If there is any further development, I will share these topics through the other platform like a PRP and some other occasions. But generally speaking, the PP talks about election of the elected officials, SG, DSG, and directors of the bureaus. And then it covers the strategy plan and then financial plan for contributory units. And then when it comes to the specific issue for the Pacific, there are many issues, developmental issues, but when it comes to the resolution itself, there are some specific resolution of the interest of the Pacific. Resolution 30, a special measure for the least developed countries, SIDs, LLDCs, and then economies with countries with economic transition. And then Resolution 139, use of telecommunications / ICT to bridge the digital divide and build the inclusive information society, and so on. And then also PP covers the public policy, internet public policy issue, and then non-discriminatory access and the cybersecurity, and so on and so forth. Let's move on to the WRC, World Radio Communication Conference. Here's the timeline, work plan for the APT preparatory process for WRC. Last year, APT formally launched our preparatory process. There was a virtual meeting, 24th to 25th September, to nominate the office bearers and structures, and the working method, and the work plan. And then coming to this year, we plan to have 2 times APG meeting. The second meeting will be held next week virtually. And then the other meeting, we are planning to have the meeting in November. And then depending on the progress of this year, we are now discussing with the office bearer whether we require additional meeting in 2022 to have some further, to give some further opportunity for our members to negotiate and to make a concrete text for the APT proposals. And then 2023, we also plan to have 2 times meeting, but we do wish that over that time, we might have some face-to-face meeting to concretize the text to be adopted as a PACP. Regarding the structure of APG, the chairman is from Korea, and then as you can see, the other officers fix the mobile and broadcasting issues. And the working party 2 talks about aeronautical and maritime issues. And then scientific issues for working group 3, and satellite issues for working party 4, and then general issues for working party 5. Regarding the topics of the interest, I think every single WRC agenda is the interest of our members. And then this time we have a representative from GSMA and Janet, and then Mohammed from Intersec can talk about the C-band and then IMT issues. So I don't wish to go in detail, maybe, but on some other occasions, there will be a tense discussion on not only those topics, but also WRC issues. And then this is the place for Pacific countries to share your views to set up the regional view. And then when it comes to WTSA, as I said, this is the first instance APT faced some difficulties in organizing the platform for the preparatory process. We started our journey back in 2019 to prepare the WTSA 2020, but due to the COVID-19, hosted country and proposed to shift the schedule in 2021 and eventually 2022. So as of now, the WTSA will be held in March, Hyderabad, India. And then Secretariat, APT Secretariat has provided a number of meetings. Not only the regular meeting, we also provide the extraordinary meeting to be held in November this year. And also APT provides some virtual interim meetings of the working group to make some concrete text through the negotiation. And then I wish to draw your attention regarding the members' consultation for ACP. It was supposed to be held after the extra meeting, but due to the changes of the TSEC schedule, we swapped the sequence. So in June, APT Secretary will circulate the PICP for get the endorsement from our members. And then APT will submit the proposal, ACP, to ITU in September. And then some of the documents, ACP, will be discussed at the TSEC in November, early next year. This is the structure. As you can see, working group 1 is ITOT working method, or working group 2 is about study questions and structure of ITO as a work organization. And the working group 3 talks about the regulation, a policy pertaining to the standardization issues. And then office bearers, as you can see, this is our office bearers, but there is no single representation from the Pacific. I wish to take note. And then a couple of slides indicate the number of PACPs. Through the series of discussion, APT members come up with 29 preliminary APT proposals. And then you can download the text through this link. And then I don't wish to go in detail, but there is one additional new resolution proposed by APT members, which is the ITOT's roles in facilitating the use of ICTs to prevent the spread of global pandemics. We wish to get the full support from our members on this resolution as well. Okay, here comes with the last conference, which is the WTDC, which is the ITOD sectors conference. APT started our work last year, starting from July, and then we had additional meeting, extra meeting in November, and then we plan to have 3 times meeting. One meeting was held in February, and then the other meeting will be held in May and August and September. As I said earlier, there is a proposal from Ethiopia to the Council to change the schedule of WTDC from November 2021 to June 2022. So there would be a question whether 3 conferences would be okay for ITO members. So depending on the situation and the agreements, the schedule would be a little bit changed by putting some additional meeting or additional virtual meeting of the working groups. This is the structure of the WTDC prime meeting. Working group 1 is study group issues, programs, associated study questions. And the working group 2 talks about the working method, declaration, and action plan. And the working group 3 is about ICT generalized development issue, including the regional initiatives. I will provide some detailed explanation about the regional initiatives later on. Okay, regarding the office bearers, fortunately we have one representation from the Pacific countries at this office bearer. At this office bearer, we have distinguished panelists at this session. Nisa Pusal, she is the working group 2 chairman. I really appreciate the Samoa administration to provide the competent chairman to this WTDC preparatory process. Regarding the regional initiatives, I would like to emphasize this issue for the interest of the Pacific members. This is similar to the previous cycle, the regional initiatives, but we wish to get more engagement from the ITO members regarding the regional initiatives. As you can see, ASP1 is addressing the specific needs of LDCs and including Pacific countries and LLDCs. So if the Pacific members has a specific issues, please feel free to suggest this one to the APT preparatory process. So when you look at the link down below, there is a concrete text for the regional initiative, including the expected resource. So if Pacific members wish to have some specific work program assessed by regional office in the ITU in Bangkok, please feel free to suggest so that we can make a concrete text to be proposed to the WTDC as to be adopted as a action plan of WTDC. So issue for the interest of the Pacific would be the declaration, Addis Ababa Declaration, and action plan. Action plan also includes the regional initiative, as I mentioned earlier. There are some other resolution for the interest of the Pacific that for the interest of the time, I will not go in detail. Resolution 5, 16, 34, 37, and the others would be your interest. This slide is my last slide. APT, for the future plan, APT will continue to provide an open platform to our members to coordinate the regional view. And then we will take some flexible approach to accommodate the additional requirements for having additional meeting and additional coordination. And then APT also provides some capacity building program. If you are not familiar with the context of a preparatory process, feel free to suggest APT to have some orientation. As of now, we plan to have two meetings, mock conference on WTDC prep meeting for this year. Maybe next year we will have some mock conference for PP preparation. And then aside from this, we have some training workshop for the preparation of WRC 23, which will be organized prior to the APG 23-4 in June or July in 2022. And then, as I said earlier, APT will send our collective letter to our members to get the endorsement for the APT proposal to be submitted WTSA 20. This is my last slide, but I wish to highlight one more thing that which is the representation from the Pacific country to our regional preparatory process. Actually, I have gone through all the preparatory process in terms of the registration, but it is unfortunate not to see many representatives from the Pacific countries. Only the APG, we have 6 members from the Pacific, and then WTDC and WTSA is quite limited representation has been made. So I strongly encourage the Pacific members to join to the APT preparatory process to reflect the real interest to set up the global policy and the regulation agenda. Thank you all. Thank you, Ashish.
Thank you very much, Jung Bong, for taking us through the regional preparatory process, which is very important because that decides the work of the ITU and member states as well for the next 4 years. So, and there has been a lot of changes happening because of the pandemic. So this overview helps a lot. I take the occasion to encourage all members to actually contribute from the Pacific to the APT prep process and also the ITU prep process. In the interest of time, let me now go on to Janet. And Janet, the floor is yours for your presentation.
Thank you, Ashish. Well, hello, everybody. I think I've already explained I'm the head of public policy in APAC for the GSMA. And it's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to share some thoughts with you at today's forum. As I mentioned, the GSMA represents the interests of mobile operators worldwide, uniting more than 750 operators, and 25 of them are actually here in the Pacific. And Carissa, who's actually driving the slides here, leads our, spearheads our our island nations activities for the GSMA. So in my presentation today, Powering the Digital Economy, Securing Consumer Trust Through Data Privacy, has a very strong message. And my goal is, at the end of this presentation, you will agree with the notion that securing consumer trust through data privacy is vital to drive the digital economy. Today, there is an untapped potential in data that is harnessed in a rights-respecting manner. It has the potential to have a real positive implications for creating new economic value and helping to solve some of society's biggest problems. Currently, though, much of the data needed to tackle these pressing challenges remains siloed within public and private sources. Now, Ashish mentioned at the beginning about the whole of government approach, and this is really vital, particularly when we look at data privacy and you harnessing data. So what I want to do today is I will provide you with some insights on the mobile data economy. I'll talk a little bit about GSMA's approach to data privacy, and then I'll talk about the role of mobile industry in the COVID-19 response. And then I'm going to share with you some data privacy resources that are available from the GSMA. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at some of the facts. By the end of 2019, sorry, I've not got the data for the end of last year, 5.2 billion people subscribe to mobile services. This is 67% of the global population. And by 2025, this will be around 70% of the population. Most of the new growth will come from India, China, Pakistan, and Nigeria. Mobile continues to make a significant contribution to the global economy. In 2019, mobile technologies and services generated 4.1 trillion of economic value added, which is around 4.7% of GDP globally. In 2019, 4G became the dominant mobile technology across the world, with over 4 billion connections accounting for over half, 52% of total connections. 4G connections will continue to grow for the next few years, peaking at just under 6% of global connections by 2023. Meanwhile, 5G is gaining pace. Today, 5G is now commercially available from 153 operators across 58 countries. The GSMA forecasts there will be 1.8 billion 5G connections by 2025, with developed Asia and US leading the way. So what does this mean? Well, more connectivity and more mobile broadband penetration lead to more consumer and enterprise data. Next slide, please. Let's come a little closer to home and look at the Pacific Islands. Again, the data a little bit older here, but the end of 2018, mobile internet penetration in the Pacific Islands was the lowest of any region in the world, just 18% of the population. However, on a positive note, this figure will increase over the coming years, and there is growing support for innovation across the region, and my colleague in the previous session talked a little bit about this. So we've got emergence of new tech hubs and a developing ecosystem of entrepreneurs and new ventures looking to adapt emerging technologies as blockchain to the particular challenges of the Pacific Islands. According to GSMA, 50% of total connections will be on 4G by 2023. The shift to mobile broadband and 4G reflects the increasing rate of smartphone adoption. There'll be 4.4 million internet users by 2025, double the number of users in 2018. Again, what does this mean? Same message: more connectivity and more mobile broadband penetration leads to more consumers and enterprise data. Next slide, please. I'd like now to share with you GSMA's overarching approach to data privacy. Thinking about privacy goes way beyond just online services. Privacy has always been the foundation on which we, the mobile industry, have built our industry. Confidentiality of communications ensures our consumers that their communications remain private. As ICT got better, data traffic became more important. Mobile phones and connected devices are the main portal through which people access the digital world. It has become the center of our digital universe. The collection of personal data by apps and devices can be highly beneficial, enabling service providers to open up new possibilities for individuals and society. Better products, smarter cities, services that improve health and disaster response systems. Next slide, please. Whether you're an individual citizen, a consumer, a government, policymaker, a regulator, or business, we all want to be able to benefit from better use of data. Digital inclusion leads to better health and education outcomes, better government services, better consumer products and services, and economic growth. To reap the benefits of digital inclusion, we need individuals to trust in the technology they see emerging around them and the data handling practices that flow from that. That trust comes from two sources. If we look at the right hand, well, it's my right hand of the slide, a good data privacy law there are two sources, and the first one is a good data privacy law. It gives individuals the tools they need to understand this new world, to see who is using the data, to be reassured that the data can't be used for just any purposes, and to complain when it goes wrong. Also, we as an industry play an important role as operators, as data handlers, to make sure we are being responsible and transparent with personal data. But to achieve these benefits, we also need the flexibility to operate in a way that makes sense commercially and allows us to innovate. So a good privacy regime is one that achieves both these goals. We'll come on to see how this is achieved, but we believe strongly that these are not a trade-off. If done well, it can be a self-reinforcing virtuous circle. Next slide, please. With so many data privacy laws being passed around the world, it's hard to keep up. Our understanding is that very few countries in the Pacific Islands have specific data privacy laws, Tonga being the notable exception. The GSMA is often asked to consider legislative proposals on data privacy. I've been involved in a number of them, like for example in India, the new proposals there, in Indonesia and in Pakistan. So what do we look for when we look at one of these proposals? First of all, as mentioned, we come this with an overarching belief that trust in the form of laws that protect consumer privacy and innovation, which requires flexibility in the laws, are not mutually exclusive. They are not principles that need to be traded off against each other. So what is a smart approach to data privacy? And I know we've got one regulator policymaker in the room here. So if you're starting to look at data privacy, these are the things that we would say that would need to be in a data privacy law. Now, there's a lot of information here, and I know we haven't got sufficient time to go into detail, but I'm going to talk about a couple of them. So let's start off with accountability. As you can see there, that's on the top of the slide. This is the bedrock on which all elements of it can be built. Organizations should be liable for what they do with personal data, but accountability does not mean just liable in law. It goes beyond compliance. The law should explicitly provide that organizations must be able to demonstrate to individuals and to supervisory authorities they have put in place comprehensive and effective measures. The law should reward accountable organizations by allowing responsible data governance and practices to be taken into account when settling administrative formalities or when determining the level of sanction in the event of infringement. So, for example, if a company has all the right security measures and response mechanisms in place, but suffers a data breach at the hands of a disgruntled employee, for example, who has access to the data, they should be given some leniency, if you like. This has the effect of incentivizing responsible data governance and provides a more comprehensive and genuine way to address data privacy concerns. Data protection laws should not be too prescriptive. Instead, they should operate on a basis of principles so as to ensure flexibility and accommodate changes in business practice and technologies. Mandating or specifying that data should be kept, say, for example, for 3 months, may have unintended negative consequences, whereas a principle that data should not be kept for longer than necessary needed to achieve the original purposes and encourages organizations to consider how long they really need the data. General data privacy laws should focus on the risk of harm to individuals. General data privacy laws, and one of the key things here, if we look at that, is on the bottom there is horizontal. So regardless of sector or technology, this represents a positive for consumers, as it gives them consistent protection without them having to worry about what technology they're using or whether the activity they're engaged in has specific rules or not. When horizontal general data privacy laws are considered for the first time or overhauled, it provides a useful opportunity for governments to review legacy sectorial laws. So, for example, most telecom operators in their licensing conditions will have data privacy obligations. If a new data privacy law is put into place, it's an opportunity to review some of those legacy provisions and make sure then that it's a level playing field. There's a lot. I was just looking at a number of things which I was thinking pick out here. I think one thing I'd like to say is about a data privacy impact assessment is a useful thing to, well, privacy by design. Let me go into that. I think is something that we would encourage. Privacy by design requires organizations to identify and mitigate risks through the life cycle of a product or process. Data privacy impact assessments is a mechanism used by organizations to evaluate the impact on individuals of certain high-risk processing activities. So, and then one very key thing, and it will be particularly key for the Pacific Islands, data needs to flow across borders. So general data privacy laws should have an enabling approach in order to allow personal data to flow across borders. There can be a range of mechanisms to do this, such as adequacy findings, contractual clauses, codes of conduct, etc. So if data privacy is regulated in this smart way, then trust does not have to fight against innovation. In fact, data privacy rules can be seen as something that will enhance innovation, enabling the development and taking to market of new products and services, while at the same time protecting consumers. As you can see on this slide, the GSMA has a wealth of resources that are available, and I would encourage you to download these reports. They're all freely available, no charge, and as you will see, we've got reports there. The Smart Data Privacy Law, is something that's very readable. We've got something on cross-border data flows, and looking to the future, we have things about what's the impact of data privacy on 5G. And then I just highlight this the COVID privacy guidelines, which leads me onto the third part of my presentation. Next slide, please. And this is about how the mobile industry has responded to the COVID-19 response and the impact that this has had in powering the digital economy. In April 2020, the World Bank, the ITU, the GSMA, and the World Economic Forum agreed a joint action plan to serve as a best practice for governments and regulators during the COVID-19 crisis. The joint action plan recommended immediate actions to sustain connectivity. So increasing bandwidth, strengthening resilience and security of networks and managing congestions, connecting vital services and ensuring the continuity of public services to safeguard the welfare of populations, promoting trust and security and safety online. I'm going to come on to that a little bit because we will see during COVID, there has been implications of more data and the impact on cybersecurity threats, and leveraging the power of mobile big data. That led to 11 recommendations. I'm not going to go through those. We haven't got time to do this, but they are available. If anyone wants to talk about them in the Q&A, I'm happy to do so. So let's go on to the next slide, please. So working with stakeholders and requests from governments, MNOs have taken a wide range of responsive measures. So if we look on the left-hand side there, the non-data industry activity, what sort of measures have they taken? So for example, they've provided free access and data quota for educational websites. They've kept people informed with SMS messages for the health industry. Then there's also data collaboration and insights. So let's have it, that's in the second circle there. From mobile networks and other internet companies was and is still very useful during the pandemic, because mobility of people is one of the crucial factors that contribute to the spread of human transmitted infectious viruses. Accurate, up-to-date information on aggregated mobile mobility patterns was in some countries vital for monitoring, predicting outbreaks and planning future resource needs, such as testing kits, beds, medical staff or equipment. Going on to the final circle there, the apps. Contact tracing apps have and continue to be used to identify people who may have been in contact with confirmed cases, or informing people if they have entered an affected area. These apps typically rely on Bluetooth proximity data or GPS location data and do not use mobile network data. So what was the impact of COVID on data volumes in the Pacific Islands? A report issued by ALOT in June 2020 entitled The Impact of COVID-19 on Network Traffic Access Across Asia revealed in the Pacific Islands there was an increase in overall network traffic volumes by more than 25% per day, every day of the week, with a significant volume increase in things like Facebook, web, person-to-person and streaming applications. Notably, P2P application usage increased by 100% even on mobile. However, the COVID-19 pandemic has also inspired cyber criminals to increase their level of activity in the Pacific region as well. Since the crisis started, the report noted there is more than a 500% increase in network attacks each day, which have the potential to dramatically impact subscribers who are even more dependent on network traffic for work, study and society. Next slide, please. I know we're going a little bit on time. So the mobile industry recognised the urgency with which governments must act to slow the spread of COVID-19 and the desire of some governments to seek help regarding these efforts. At the same time, the mobile industry recognised that the use of mobile network operator data by governments or agencies raises serious privacy concerns. To meet these dual objectives, the GSMA has developed the COVID-19 privacy guidelines, which reflect recommendations on how the mobile industry can maintain trust while responding to those governments and public health agencies that have sought assistance to fight against COVID-19. I'm not going to go into that. I'd like to go into the guidelines, but clearly you're not going to have enough time to do that. So let me move on to the last slide, please. So this is my final part of the presentation. As mentioned, we've explored the notion that we all want to be able to benefit from better use of data. To do that, we need individuals to trust into the technology they see emerging around them and the data handling practices that flow from that. To recap, that trust comes from a good data privacy law, which gives individuals the tools they need to understand this new world, to see who is using their data, to be reassured that the data can't be used for just any purpose and complain when it goes, and they have the ability to complain when it goes wrong. The industry, the mobile industry, has a role to play in gaining consumer trust. As operators, as data handlers, we need to make sure we are being responsible and transparent with personal data. If data privacy is regulated in a smart way, then trust does not have to fight against innovation. In fact, data privacy rules can be seen as something that will enhance innovation, enabling the development and taking to market of new products and services. Again, I mentioned we have a wealth of useful resources. I've highlighted some of them before, but there are a couple I'd like to, that I think might be interesting for you, which is using mobile big data analytics to combat global challenges. There's a whole stream of webinars there, which I think you'll find interesting. AI ethics principles and mobile privacy and big data analytics for impact consideration. So that's all from me. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm very obviously happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Janet, for bringing up this very important issue. And I encourage all participants to look at these reports. I'm sure this is an issue of concern back, I think, 3-4 years ago when ITU and PITA were organizing the October event. There was a big focus on this, and this, having spoken to regulators and the industry, this is a common area which requires a great, I would say, regional discussion to arrive at something which is acceptable on both the sides and provides the right enabling environment going forward. In the interest of time, we are running a little bit late, so maybe I'll switch on quickly to Mohamed. And Mohamed, the floor is yours for, and I know there will be a big switch from data privacy to spectrum. So Mohamed, please go on. Sorry, Mohamed, sorry, you're muted, I think.
Yes, thank you very much. That's the word of the for the year. You're on mute. Thank you, Jeanette, for the presentation. I'm just trying to put my slides on slide mode. If you just bear with me. There we go. Okay, great. So thank you very much. Greetings to everybody. My name is Mohamed Jawad. I'm here to give you a perspective about C-band from Intelsat, from the satellite industry. Obviously, there are two sides to every coin. You've heard a little bit from the mobile side. I'm here to give you some information from the satellite side. And without further ado, I can go into the slides. In the agenda, I will cover a little bit of an overview of the C-band situation today, talk a little bit about Earth station registrations, the design principle of FSS receivers, how are they impacted by mobile base stations, the filter performance to mitigate some of the interference, and give you a bit of examples of what we at Intelsat have done to protect our teleports, and hopefully that will help regulators and service providers in your region to adhere to some of these mitigation measures. So just a bit of overview. When we talk about 5G spectrum, we're always focusing on C-band. And in fact, WRC after WRC, we have focused a lot on this band. And it seems now we have reached an impasse where fundamentally, when you go above 3.6 gigahertz, the global situation becomes fragmented. And we can see this here in this graph, and particularly in region 3, in this region. Above 3.6 gigahertz has really become the borderline where IMT has not progressed in Asia. And I think we cannot have a wholesale approach beyond 3.6. Because afterwards, every region has a fragmented approach, and you can see this from some of the examples I've mentioned. And we can talk about them in a little bit more detail in the next few slides. We need to have a balanced way of thinking when looking at spectrum bands. For example, sub 1 gigahertz bands, i.e. the 700 megahertz, have accounted for 20% of mobile operators using the spectrum today. Then when we have the mid bands, the 2.5 or the 3.5 gigahertz range, i.e. up to 3.6 gigahertz. Today, mobile base station towers can cover several miles using these frequency bands and provide throughputs up to 900 megabits per second. And what about the high millimeter wave bands? Well, today, a single operator can deploy 5G in cities providing ad hoc capacity demand, while the suburban and rural footprints and particularly the island can be served on coverage spectrum below 1 gigahertz. And there are examples of MNOs doing exactly that in these slides. So a balanced approach is needed to cater for wide geographical areas and ultra high speed capacity with low latencies. And regulators can now assign millimeter wave spectrum knowing full well that there is an ecosystem in place. But governments and regulators must also ensure their priorities when it comes to mobile broadband policy, above all, does not look at revenue maximization when awarding new frequencies. So success isn't just measured about allocating new spectrum bands. This cannot be better presented when you compare the situation of FSS usage across different regions of the world. This has created, for example, the need for Europe to consider C-band for 5G, primarily because today FSS has limited use in Europe to only business-to-business type services. This means these are large teleports in well-known locations and can be protected. However, the situation when it comes to the Pacific region and in Asia in general, it relies heavily on C-band usage for ubiquitous terminals, mostly in unknown locations, and therefore developing mitigation measures to protect them is impossible. The message here is one size does not fit all. Every region is different and regulators need to be mindful of this. If I recap the first slide I mentioned, when you go above 3.6, the situation is fragmented because of the usage and the demand in every region. And this notion that every MNO needs 100 megahertz really should be challenged because it has been used as a pretext to seek more and more spectrum in bands which remain to this day used extensively by FSS services. Furthermore, when you look at the spectrum proceedings and auctions from across the globe, we don't see MNOs rushing to acquire 100 megahertz. Sure, it is desirable to have, but as evidence show, it is not necessary. For example, Vodafone in the UK has launched 5G with just 50 megahertz of spectrum. Countries across the world who have 4 MNOs do not acquire 400 megahertz, and so on. Look at India, for example, one of the largest densely populated countries in the world, has 4 national mobile network operators and only allocated 200 megahertz. India, the same, China, the same, similar situation. They have 4 MNOs, but they've only allocated 300 megahertz. And there are other examples from Asia in these slides, in Europe and in the Americas as well. So we need to be mindful of this and vigilant of it. And when it comes to Asia in particular, well, evidence has shown that the total ITU mobile bandwidth available today is 1,500 megahertz. Out of that bandwidth, 915 megahertz is harmonized for IMT today, but only 549 megahertz has been licensed. This leaves 40% of spectrum still available for MNOs to acquire. It is prudent to utilize this available spectrum before seeking additional more spectrum. And I think from the outcome of WRC 19, Asia did take the prudent approach to not allocate any more spectrum above 3.6 gigahertz. Furthermore, when you look at the Ofcom study, and we can share this with you separately, it's a very detailed study, quite important because it actually conducted, the regulator in UK conducted this research after they've auctioned the first phase of their 5G spectrum. And what they have demonstrated is that this notion of 100 megahertz per MNO, it really does not hold truth, because MNOs have actually been able to deliver up to 770 megabits per second. If you look at the graph and the red line at the bottom, the lowest red line, that's showing with 40 megahertz, and this is non-contiguous spectrum, you can achieve 770 megabits per second download throughput speed, and up to 440 megabits per second in the upload speeds. So with that said, this is the backdrop of the situation. What we need to do now, and we are mindful as Intelsat that there are interference cases from our customers where 5G has been deployed across the world and in some cases in Asia. But if administrations need to look at mitigation measures, then we'll talk about that in a minute. But when it comes to registration, we need to be mindful that registration of terminals is very, very important. This gives us the ability to ensure that there's a recognition from the regulator that there are terminals in place. And the situation when it comes to the registration is a lot of these terminals are not actually licensed. They don't have to be licensed. And therefore, it is not always easy for the regulator to know where the terminals are and how much deployment density there is. And that's why registration of these terminals is very important. So when we go to the next slides, and just on this slide, actually, who needs to be registered? Well, we think that earth station owners, ATV operators, service license holders, broadcasters, and finally teleport operators all need to be registered. And please, we'd like to work with you to protect the C-band spectrum for the satellite usage from unacceptable interference from terrestrial services. So this is a very important point about registration, because up to now, domestically, the protection of these earth stations has not been recognized by the regulators simply because they don't need to be licensed. So we need to license them to give a better understanding of the situation. And it is very clear that FSS and mobile co-frequency sharing in the same geographical area is not feasible. Numerous ITU studies show that co-frequency sharing between 5G and FSS is not feasible. Even statements made by terrestrial vendors such as Ericsson and Nokia during the FCC proceedings that Intelsat has been involved in have shown and stated that sharing was not feasible due to the large exclusion zones around earth stations. This is because the 5G signals are considerably more powerful than a satellite signal. This complicates coexistence between mobile and FSS. If you just think about the signal from a satellite receiver, it has to detect the signal that's traveling 36,000 kilometers from a geostationary satellite in orbit. When it arrives at the NNA and the NNB receivers, the signal is so weak in comparison to a 5G terrestrial base station nearby that it simply saturates the LNBs. So when administrations or countries are considering to go above the 3.6, for example, or even when there is interference caused by terrestrial services, then the right mitigation measures need to be in place. And we have a white paper in this conference, and please have a look at it, because it gives you an overview of what Intelsat has studied, and out of the measurements that we have done, what are the mitigation measures that need to be undertaken. Since mobile signals can interfere with FSS in two fundamental ways. One, saturating the NNA and NNB of the earth stations, even when the mobile signal is adjacent to the satellite signal. And two, out-of-band emissions of the mobile signals can cause in-band interference to FSS signals. To manage this interference, FSS receivers require three key policy decisions from administrations. One, earth stations need to be fitted with a bandpass filter, and a lot of these filters could be subsidized from auction proceedings that take place for 5G. Two, impose a guard band with the filter, because simply without a guard band, the filters will not have the bandwidth to transition its operation. And number three is to adopt the out-of-band limits, the right out-of-band 5G limits on the mobile transmissions to ensure the protection of the FSS in the adjacent bands. So one way to protect the C-band is, as I mentioned, to do the registration, but also there are other mitigation measures to ensure the proper reception of an FSS signal. Let's talk a little bit about that and explain how the signal is interfered with. Earth station equipment is designed to detect signals with relatively low carrier power, as I mentioned, by employing very sensitive LNBs. As shown here, the operational limits of a typical FSS Earth station LNB is around -55 dBm, which provides a 16 dB margin from the typical total carrier power of -72 dBm. In comparison, a 5G base station transmits at significantly higher power levels when an ERIP as high as 65 dBm per hertz. And this, when you do the calculations, the level of 5G signals that will be received at an FSS Earth station is dependent on many factors. These factors include the distance between the base station and the Earth station, a gain of the FSS Earth Station antenna in the direction of the 5G base station, a gain of the 5G base station antenna in the direction of the Earth Station, a clutter loss and blockage, and other factors come into play. So as described above in the previous slide, the 5G signal power at the input of the FSS Earth Station NMB can easily be saturated. And the NMB, when it's saturated, it wipes out the satellite signal completely. You cannot put a price on watching a football match in a cup final and missing the final penalty shootout or the final goal. You cannot put a price on such a service. And this is where the NMBs can actually be degraded by terrestrial 5G interference. The best solution to mitigate the 5G interference is to insert an RF waveguide filter between the output of the antenna and the input of the NMB. This will filter out to a great extent the unwanted 5G signal from saturating the LMB. As shown, with a filter to operate, it is necessary to have a guard band between the edge of the 5G transmission and the FSS transmission to provide the waveguide filter.
My apologies, Mohammed. Can you please accelerate a little bit? Short of time. Okay. Sorry for that. Thanks.
I have a few more slides, so I'll try my best. So the necessary bandwidth to reject the filter is needed, and the guard band is important to this. So here I give you demonstrations of some of the measurements we have done. In order to have the right filter, it shows the ratio between the separation distance versus the spectrum gap between an IMT and an FSS for 3 generic filters that we provided here. And again, please have a look at the white paper that we provided to give you a better understanding between the distance required, i.e. the separation distance, and the type of filters that are needed. Another mitigation measure is separation distance. So when you look at the separation distance, you need to calculate, for example, the I over N protection criteria. And Intelsat has done a lot of work on this. And we simulate a typical base station, 5G base station, around the FSS teleport to work out what the I over N contours are and look at what the minimum separation distance needed to protect the FSS teleport. An example of this is what we've done in our teleport in Fuchstadt in Germany, where we actually took the aggregate effect of the interference from the terrestrial station and simulated it around Fuchstadt. And what we've determined were some of the factors that we use in the simulation is the terrain, the coverage, the IMT base station, density deployment, and other factors and parameters that took into account into the simulation. In conclusion, we came out with a 60-kilometer separation distance to protect these teleports. Please do reach out to us if you need a guidance and assistance on how to simulate this and how to work out the right separation distance needed to protect teleports in your region. So in terms of the C-band Earth stations, there are some policy decisions that regulators can take today to have a proper mitigation measures, such as ensuring that the adjacent, the 5G signal adjacent to the satellite signal has the proper out-of-band emission and to ensure that the waveguide filters are subsidized as part of the auction proceedings. This is very important to ensure the protection of the incumbent services. And MNOs actually also have an important role. For example, using lower transmit power levels for their base stations, installing better transmit out-of-band emissions, and using MIMO technology to null the radiated pattern in the direction of an FSS Earth station. So a lot of coordination can be done on the ground between the terrestrial entity and the satellite entity in place. So in conclusion, when it comes to WRC agenda items, with all of this said, we think that the agenda items in place right now, agenda item 1.2, 1.3, whilst they are not relevant to your region, it is vital to be aware of it. And our position is that the spectrum challenges and connectivity challenges in Asia are not caused by spectrum shortages. It is infrastructure, affordability, and coverage. I say this with the backdrop that satellite continues to provide critical services that cannot be provided by other means. And it will be simply welfare destruction if you accommodate INT in these bands, especially in the 3.4, 3.6 gigahertz still remains unused. So it's prudent to use what's available today before looking at additional spectrum. Therefore, we advocate for a position of no change when it comes to these agenda items. And before people accuse us of blocking progress on 5G, we do have alternatives, and there are alternatives to this. For example, China is doing quite good precedents in refarming 2G and 3G spectrum. Dynamic spectrum sharing allows mobile operators to use the same spectrum band with different radio access technologies such as 4G and 5G. Spectrum sharing among MNOs leads to higher efficiency and lower OPEX. 60 mobile operators in 10 countries have actually launched 5G using DSS technology. And there is the millimeter wave spectrum for high density city centers across China, Japan, Korea, and other parts of Asia. So these can provide high cost effective solutions to 5G services. So there is an alternative, a win-win approach to deploy 5G services while ensuring the protection and the right mitigation measures are in place to protect the FSS services. So with that, I conclude my opening remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mohamed, and I'm sorry to have interrupted in the middle, but I wish we had more time for discussion on this. This issue is very important and sensitive across different segments, but I think we have the right person now to go, and that's the regulator. So, Madam Regulator, so I hand it over to you, Lisa. And in the interest of time, you are the regulator and you're best positioned to regulate the time as well. So thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Ashish. The advantage of being the last speaker is that a lot of the issues that you had in your speech have been covered by other people. So yay, you can reduce your speech or your presentation. The disadvantage is those speakers that spoke before you took all the time. So anyway, I'm very pleased to be here, and our presentation is really providing our country report and what we believe is happening here in Samoa. And we also have challenges that we are facing as administrator of the spectrum, which a lot of former speakers have touched on, and also regulatory operations development that we have in place. So some of those details will be covered in our PowerPoint presentation. But in terms of connectivity, Samoa has a whole of government approach, and we're working on that going forward. Now, I would like to briefly touch on one of the major issues that we, as the Pacific Islands, are facing, and that is our fight for the satellite bands to be protected from IMT services. Samoa is following the ITU and APT working group meetings, and we are observing and monitoring and the inputs from other countries and also from different regions that will affect the small island developing states, in particular those of the Pacific. Now, it is very important, and I urge every single Pacific Island country that we must stand together to protect our needs, especially with the 5G developments currently undergoing discussions with regards to what spectrum to be used and also the technicality behind its implementation. And I just want to mention that Samoa supports an NC for 1.2 and 1.3. And on that note, I would now like to pass on to my colleague, Teresa Pale, to do our presentation on the PowerPoint. Thank you very much. Teresa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Regulator. And thank you, PITA, for this opportunity. Salofalava, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to present on the policy and regulatory aspects currently implemented in Samoa, administered by the Office of the Regulator. This presentation, next slide. Okay. This presentation will provide insights on architecture of regulations OOTR implements to guide services which we regulate, which are the telecommunications, broadcasting, electricity, and postal services. It also includes infrastructure of ICT network and insights on some of the regulatory operations and developments we have carried out over the years to achieve effective and efficient regulations. A brief general information on Samoa. As you are aware, Samoa is an independent state with a population of around 200,000 people, and our currency is in Tala. OOTR's mission is to facilitate and promote competitive and effective regulations, while at the same time protect the interests of consumers. And how do we go about achieving it? Through planning, developing, and implementing appropriate rules and policies, such as the ones you see on the screen. We have 4 acts, but in the interest of time, I have only noted 3, and they are the Telecommunications Act 2005, Broadcasting Act 2010, and Electricity Act 2010. The acts have their own associated rules and fees, as shown on the slide. For example, there is the telecommunication license fees that articulates the costs of different services, whereas the radio spectrum fees breaks down costs for different spectrum licenses. We also have in place a new license regime for telecommunication service license and broadcasting service license. This slide continues with the regulations, and I would like to direct your attention to the Csan Policy 2016. As a result of court cases relating to pornography and indecent material involving young adults in court, the Prime Minister directed the Office of the Regulator and other shareholders, such as the Office of the Attorney General, to address this issue. As a response, the Child Sexual Abuse Material Policy, or Csan Policy, was developed and approved for implementation by Cabinet. So the Csan Policy provides, amongst other things, 2 important components to be implemented, and one of them is the performance of an awareness campaign to equip the public in protecting our young children and young adults from harm while being online. This awareness was conducted since 2018 up until 2020 to all the colleges, as well as youth and parents in all the villages in Samoa. Secondly, we have the IXP policy, which is in the pipeline and is currently being reviewed by the Ministry of Communication, Information and Technology. Lastly, for this slide, we put there the NETOP, or the National Emergency Telecommunications Plan, that was reviewed in 2019. The review resulted in the development of 2 other documents, and they are the NETP and the NETOP, or the Operational Plan. The NETP is a 5-year strategic plan, while the NETOP is an annual plan that describes how the current telecommunication facilities are used before, during, and after a disaster strikes to prevent, mitigate, and respond to the effects of such incidents. We also wish to express our gratitude to the ITU for their assistance in reviewing this plan. For our ICT network and infrastructure, because we are running out of time, well, that's the whole picture of it. I believe we can all see it and understand it easier from looking at the numbers on the screen. But I would like to say that the 2300 megahertz band is used for fixed wireless access here in Samoa. continuation of ICT infrastructure, showing that we also have terrestrial, microwave link, satellite, optical fiber, and submarine cables here in Samoa. And now to the challenges. As you may know, this month last year, our office was burnt down to the ground due to an electrical fault. Actually, tomorrow marks the 1 year since we lost our office to the fire. We lost our physical equipment, including the tools that we use for spectrum management and spectrum monitoring. But the biggest challenge that we faced was the mental or psychological and emotional pain we experienced during and after the fire occurred. So I respectfully ask the sponsors and any companies here, if you have any extra money there and looking for proper ways to spend it, well, now you know who to give it to. We need your help, more specifically your financial help. Another challenge we are facing comes with emerging trends and new technology. As mentioned by the Madam Regulator, we are following ongoing discussions in ITU and APT forums on the WRC 23 agenda items. Samoa has been submitting inputs to Working Party 5D and 4A of the ITU study groups in relation to the satellite's C-band and L-band spectrum as shown on the screen. These submissions include ensuring coexistence between MSS and L-band, critical utilization of C-band by LDS and SIDS, and the WRC Agenda Item 9.2, Article 21.5. As you can see there, we also put Agenda Item 1.5 as Samoa is on the lookout or observing positions from other countries, especially Region 1, with regards to an issue that we hope might be considered for the progression of the discussion, particularly for Region 3 in broadcasting TV UHF frequency band. Lastly, the regulatory operations developments we have carried out, and some of that are in the pipeline for our plans. We have the digital TV project, which was launched in 2019, and now we are at a coverage of more than 95%. Secondly, with the pandemic in 2020, OOTR assigned additional spectrum for mobile broadband coverage service during the COVID-19 state of emergency. Thirdly, these are some of the policies and regulations in place for review: the Spectrum Management Plan 2011, the Principal Frequency Spectrum Assignments 2017, the Samoa National Numbering Plan 2016, and the National Frequency Allocation Plan 2017. Another significant development is the connectivity project, which we are currently on phase 2. And this is a provision of internet connections via KA VSATs to all schools, including remote schools in Samoa. Lastly, with the addition of new cables, it has helped with the provision of services, which in turn affect the cost, enabling OOTR to manage current and future services in terms of cost effectiveness. And I believe that concludes Samoa's country report presentation. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Nisa and Teresa, for your presentation. It's great to see so much happening in Samoa. I see some echo. In the interest of time, may I request, Fred, can we extend by 10 minutes and also request participants and panelists?
Yes, for sure.
Fred, is it okay?
You have
Thanks so much. I think it's time that we open up the floor for any questions or any comments. Yeah, there is I think Janet would like to say something. Janet raised the hand. So Janet, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Ashish. And I agree. It's been a great session. We've had some really useful input here. And, the one thing I would just say about 5G and spectrum, it is a complicated discussion. And, when we need to go into, maybe this is not the detailed the forum where we can go into all the detail. There are pros and cons. And as Mohammed said, there are solutions. And I think that's what we have to work to, is what is the right solution? Because, in every country, there is something different. We have, there are recommendations, but that has to be looked at on a country by country basis. And, but I wouldn't, some of the statements that were made by Mohammed, I would probably say if I was on a detailed discussion with him, I might not totally agree with all of those, but I don't think that's appropriate here. But, what I do think is the message that he made, which was very good at the end, is that let's find solutions. And I think that's what we're all here to do, and work on that basis.
Thank you. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Mohammed. And, the right platform is APT and ITU, where these discussions are going. If this discussion could be solved in 10 minutes, we wouldn't need a 4-year preparation for WRC and the first meeting just after the WRC. Okay. So I guess that the points are well made. Mohammed, you wanted to say something before you go?
Yeah, just to complement what Janet said, really. I do believe that a balanced approach, and this is not for us to take, we're as an industry just giving our points across. But regulators really need to be mindful of the incumbent services. And that's what we mean by a balanced approach. Samoa, I think, has been very active in this regard. A lot of the Pacific Islands require the need of connectivity. And I think satellite has catered for that in many parts of Asia as well. So when and if administrations start considering WRC agenda items that are impacting the satellite side, then the right mitigation measures have to be in place from the outset rather than an afterthought. And that's what we try to do. Please do reach out to us as Intelsat. We're here to help and to try and provide what measures and studies, which could be knowledge transfer to regulators, to try and develop the right WRC agenda item positions when it comes to spectrum-related matters. So we're here and we stand by to support you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. And, as you know, that there's a global symposium for regulators that ITU hosts, and we encourage you to join that. There's also APT, Policy and Regulatory Forum. There's also APT PRFP, specifically for the Pacific. And then in ITU, what we have is the Asia Pacific version of the Regulators Roundtable, which will be happening from 8th to 9th June 2020. And we encourage all of you to participate in that. I hope this discussion will go on, and what we will come up, I'm sure Nisa would say that, look, for me, it is the consumers, it's the citizens that's important. So think end to end. Think how is it going to change the life of a citizen living in the remote island of community, and can we all work together to find a solution? So with that note, maybe I thank all the panelists. Excellent discussion, excellent. We started from regional, we went to the important elements of connectivity, from satellite to terrestrial. I talked about data privacy and data protection in any country. I think that's a big issue that we need to resolve together. And that would pave the way for Digital Pacific, where we can share data. We can use this connectivity not only within the country, but across countries in a meaningful way, in a way that citizens are confident in using the data. And we can use that data to deliver the services we think for each individual. So thank you, everybody. And I hand it back to George for his kind comments and suggestions. Yes, George, thanks very much. George, over to you. Yeah.
Right, okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you to the panel, and thank you, Ashish, for moderation. Especially with this policy and regulatory panel. We have come to the end of this 3-day forum. I hope everyone has enjoyed, and especially in the information that's been shared. Now I'll end with my closing remarks. Honorable Ministers, the ITU Regional Director, Asia Pacific, APT Secretary General, Asia Pacific, GSMA Head, Asia Pacific, industry partners and valued forum sponsors, PITA members. Thank you for your participation, industry knowledge and solution sharing in this virtual 3-day PITA forum, as we all continue to try and stay relevant in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you to our valued sponsors and all those who participated in panel discussions, presenters and moderators. Thank you to fellow PITA executives and the PITA manager and office for the sourcing, coordination and participation of a media, which I guess we may all have to live with for another year or two. PITA hopes that we have all benefited from this 3-day forum, COVID-19 business learnings, connectivity, solutions and technology to be digital ready, networking, and above all, lasting friendships, despite done virtually. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit at the turn of 2020, it challenged the foundations of social and economic norms of PITA members. The internet infrastructure came under huge stress, but in general, the internet remained resilient enough to respond to traffic spikes. However, it is clear that this resilience has not been uniform, simply because islands are at varying levels of digital readiness. The COVID is also starkly revealing the consequences of the digital divide amongst PITA members. Cybersecurity is not a new concern, but the onset of the COVID pandemic has made many more attuned to the role it plays. The pandemic has brought 3 major trends: an acceleration in digitalization, an increased exposure of infrastructure to cyber attacks, an increase in collective risk profiles due to workers working outside of the office firewall, and a surge in malicious cyber activities. And a good example is the Fijian government's data center that was attacked earlier this week. COVID has shown the need for resilient networks, digital skills and awareness, the criticality of the internet, as well as opportunities presented for the industry and governments, regulatory and policy makers. On a national level, more so for the Pacific Island countries, how will governments be able to position themselves to come out of this pandemic will be a challenge, as we are dependent on donor agencies. National debt levels are rising. The pandemic has shown gaps in our industry as well as opportunities. Hopefully, we will come out of this crisis much stronger and better prepared together. As the former All Blacks rugby captain Richie McCaw said, sometimes the worst experiences are the ones where you learn the most lessons. There is hope with the availability of vaccines, which may lead to border openings. Earlier this morning, I took my first jab. 50,000 Fijians should be vaccinated by the end of this week. Until the next PITA forum, which hopefully we can meet face-to-face and share refreshments, stay safe and sane. Pinaka, and thank you to all as we log out of this PITA Business and Exposition Forum. Cheers, Mbula.